What's up YouTube? Daniel Carter at Afro Herb here. Today we are going through the step-by-step process of converting this 12 by 12 by 18 Exoterra enclosure into a naturalistic setup for tropical arboreal geckos. So before we meet the soon-to-be inhabitant of this enclosure, it's worth taking a look at the wide array of stuff I've got on my desk here. First and foremost are my substrates. Right here, this is a bag of Terra Fauna by the Bio Dude. I've been seeing a lot more of this guy's stuff lately at reptile expos, at pet stores, and so I've been wanting to try it out. I've got 2 bags of his product here, and we're going to test them out and see how they fare in this enclosure. This is essentially just a bioactive substrate mix. It is specifically designed for arboreal tropical geckos like crested geckos, day geckos, etc. And it should do really well. It's designed to maintain humidity but still drain well. And when it drains, that is where this comes in. This is called hydrogrow. This is just a fancy name for a drainage layer. And essentially what a drainage layer does is you put it in the bottom of your enclosure and it prevents your dirt from turning into mud. All the water is going to drain down into here, it's going to be filtered, and it's going to go back up through the enclosure via the water cycle. So we have our drainage layer, we've got our primary substrate here. Right here, this is another component of our substrate. This is a bag of cheesecloth. This is nothing special. I'm pretty sure I originally got this at Target or Walmart or something. And that is going to serve as a barrier between the drainage layer and the substrate. Usually you're going to want to use something synthetic like a window screen, plastic mesh of some sort to provide that barrier, because this is likely to decompose in some way over time and it might not be as functional a year or 2 from now as it is right now. But it should do the job, it'll serve its purpose fine, and I don't think it's going to be an issue. What was on my far right here is a block of sphagnum moss, and this can be used either as a primary substrate in some cases or as an accent or something to put in a humid hide box. This is Galapagos brand golden sphagnum, and I don't believe it's actually from the Galapagos Islands. The back says it's from Santa Barbara, California. So we're going to be using this in addition to our other substrates just to spruce it up a little bit and make sure that the humidity stays where we want it to be. Apart from all our substrate, we have a couple pieces of hardscape here. These are 2 very nice cork bark tubes. These are going to be our gecko's primary hides. Now, last but not least, this is our enclosure. As I previously stated, it is a 12 by 12 by 18 Exoterra tank. This is a really commonly available model of tank in the United States. I imagine it is elsewhere as well. But if you don't have one of these, you can use a vertical 10-gallon tank, a plastic tub would even work, anything of that sort. So now that all of our components are out of the way, it is definitely time to meet our new inhabitant. So this guy is an adult male Geckolepis maculata, also known as a giant fish scale gecko. There are many different species of gecko that go by the common name fish scale, but this guy is an arboreal species from Madagascar. Something really unique about this gecko is its primary defense mechanism, and this defense mechanism means that this is a display-only animal. You should not handle this species, nor should you handle most day gecko or Phelsema species. This guy does something called slough his skin, and essentially what that means is that these giant scales on his back are able to detach from his body, like a lizard drops its tail. It's not pretty. You can Google it, and they look kind of like a piece of raw chicken when it's all said and done. But remarkably enough, they are able to grow all of their scales back even after they've shed them like that, and it's basically just a defense mechanism that helps them evade predators in the wild. For that reason, it's not advised to handle them. I did so very gently for this video, and even then, this is a very flighty species. I actually lost him twice in the process of filming, and I had to retrieve him before I could set everything down here. But this is a very sweet little gecko. As I said, I have 1 adult male right now. I'm hoping to get 1 or 2 females for him in the future and set up a small breeding group. So we have our Geckolepis maculata in here. We also have this plant species. I'm not actually entirely certain what this guy is, but I know he is suitable for a bioactive enclosure with a tropical gecko. I don't have any on hand at the time of filming, but in the future I will also probably put some pothos, maybe a snake plant, any sort of hardy tropical plant in with this guy just to give him some more foliage, some more cover, and places to hide. Here we go again. Let's see if I can get him back into his box uneventfully. Alright, crisis averted. Our gecko is back in his critter keeper, and we're going to set him aside until we are done setting up his enclosure. So, first things first, we need to get started with our tank. We're going to put the drainage layer in first because that goes on bottom. Then we are going to cut our cheesecloth, add our substrate, and then position our pieces of hardscape. Once all that's said and done, I think we're going to put in some sphagnum moss, add that plant, and then it'll be time to introduce our gecko into his new setup. I'm not certain if I'm actually going to use this entire bag or not, but we will see. In an enclosure this size, you're going to want to use about 1.5 inches of drainage layer. Now this stuff is very dusty, so before I go any further, I'm going to mist it down a bit with water. You can see it's very lightweight as well. We're going to even this out. There we go, there's our drainage layer. Not that bad. So our next step is going to be to cut this cheesecloth to size. As we have, as the base of our tank is 12 by 12 inches, we're going to need a square foot of this cheesecloth. And I might use 2 layers just to ensure that there's a good barrier. Okay, here is our cheesecloth. It's not that pretty, but if we fold it over, it should do its job just fine. We're going to pack this up against the edges, sort of push it down against the drainage layer. And there we go. Not too pretty, but it's going to be buried anyways, and it is all about functionality with this stuff. I'm going to mist this down as well. Just try to get it to hold its shape. And now we're going to start with our substrate. So we are going to use all of this terra fauna, judging by the amount of the hydrogrow that was in that bag and the amount that we used. I'm going to think that this whole bag is going to be enough for this enclosure. We'll see. Now, this is a bit of a messy process if you hadn't figured that out already, so don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Oh yeah, this will be plenty. So right now what I'm doing is I'm packing down the substrate around the edges to hold our drainage barrier in place. Okay, so we've used about 2/3 of the bag so far. I think I am going to add our pieces of hardscape now and then fill in the rest of the substrate around them. I think my goal for these is going to be to set them up so that they look like natural tree trunks sticking out of the middle of the enclosure. So, of course, my camera decided to cut out on me right as we were getting to the good part, but as you can see, we've come up with quite a nice design in here. Our two cork bark tubes are positioned to look like little vertical tree trunks standing up in here. Our plant is in the back left corner. This is going to grow. It's going to fill up the space up here and come out into the front, create sort of a nice ground cover, and also vine up into the trees a little bit. We've got our substrate here, and we've added a good layer of sphagnum moss around the front as a visual accent, and we've got a good bit around the back here as well, just to help retain humidity in the enclosure. So we've given this a final misting down, and it is now time to introduce our gecko. So our little dude is in here. He's probably scared out of his wits because he has no clue what's going on. He was in a deli cup for about 24 hours, and then he was in this critter keeper for another half a day or so. But I think he'll be in a much better mood once he gets in here. So we've got him under our sphagnum moss right here. He's looking pretty jumpy, as you can see. He is such a beautiful animal. We're going to be positioning him just like this, and we're going to let him explore and get in there on his own, because I don't want to hurt him at all. There he goes. All right. Our Geckolepis maculata has entered its enclosure. And there he is. Thirsty little guy. There you can see some of his really nice iridescence. It doesn't pick up on camera well, but right now he's under some bright light. What made me fall in love with this particular species of gecko are those stupid little stubby legs and the way they waddle around. It's pretty endearing. They also remind me quite a bit of little tiny miniature pangolins. So with all that said and done, we are now going to move this little dude up into his permanent spot on my new gecko breeding rack. He's the first arboreal gecko to make it onto this shelf. So now that our little guy is up there, it is worth taking a moment to talk about his feeding habits. And he's going to eat basically the same thing as any crested gecko, any day gecko, Rhacodactylus, etc. Most arboreal geckos have a pretty similar diet. This guy in particular is going to be eating this. It is essentially an all-in-one powdered mixture of all the food that they're going to need. There are a lot of companies that make powdered diets for geckos. Pangea is the one I recommend. They use very few filler ingredients. If you look at this ingredient label right now, the very first ingredient is dried banana. That's a good sign. In addition to his powdered diet, he's also going to be receiving insects as a sort of supplement to his regular diet. Now, the primary feeder insects I would recommend for an arboreal gecko are pinhead crickets or very young dubia roaches. And this is a cup of about 200 young dubia roach nymphs. I have a guide that I uploaded maybe 2 years ago detailing how to create a colony of these guys to feed your geckos and any other reptiles you might have. I should also note that as this is a nocturnal species of gecko, it doesn't require any sort of UV or UVB light. It does, however, need to remain at a relatively high level of humidity, and it does need to be within a range of about 70 to 80 degrees. My room stays at about 76 most of the time because of all the heat lamps I have running in here, so he should be just fine at room temperature. If your room doesn't get quite that warm, I would recommend using a very small heat pad on the side of the enclosure. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to leave a comment in the comment section below. I try to get back to as many questions as possible. And if you're new to the channel and want to see more reptile and amphibian related content in the future, don't be afraid to subscribe. Thanks again for watching.